Warning, I say a lot of bad words. If you're under 13, you probably shouldn't be watching this. I'm pretty sure that most of you are aware of who Insomniac Games are. If not, first of all, hi, I'm Stephanie, welcome to the channel. Second of all, they're a game development studio most known for their work on PlayStation exclusives like Spyro the Dragon, Ratchet & Clank, Resistance, and the past couple Spider-Man games. You'll often hear them mentioned in relation to other studios like Naughty Dog and Sucker Punch as one of the teams behind some of the most acclaimed and popular titles associated with the PlayStation brand. Though unlike the other two, Insomniac also has a surprising number of titles branching out to other platforms that often go more under the radar compared to their PlayStation exclusives. Did you guys know they made a Metroidvania title a few years ago? It's buried in my endless ocean of a Steam backlog, so I can't say if it was good or not. Sorry. Sony didn't officially become their parent company until late 2019, so they largely worked as an independent studio under contract with big-name publishers. It was only in the early to mid-2010s that they had titles published by companies other than Sony, like Microsoft and EA. Among the games to come from this was 2014's Sunset Overdrive, one of the earlier Xbox One exclusives. I remember this game immediately stuck out to me with how vibrant and carefree a vibe it gave off during its initial reveal, which was quite refreshing given the AAA scene before and ever since. I've always wanted to eventually play this game, but it took me a while before I was ever able to for one simple but very big reason. I don't own an Xbox One. I have nothing against the Xbox brand, but compared to Sony, Nintendo, and PC gaming, it's the platform I have the least interest in personally. Most of the Xbox titles I had interest in getting ported to PC doesn't exactly motivate me to drop money on the system either. That's how I marathoned Halo, that's how I played both Ori games before they got Switch ports too, and that's how I played Sunset Overdrive. It's unfortunate though that it seems like this game got buried over the years due to it being an Xbox exclusive that's not among a major flagship franchise like Halo or Gears of War. Today, I'm gonna change that with my 3,000 subscribers and content that never wins any favors with the YouTube algorithm. Let's go! Also, apologies for any frame drops in the video, it's not the game's fault, OBS really didn't want to cooperate with me getting footage for this one. Sunset Overdrive wastes basically no time thrusting you straight into the action. After spending some time creating your character, who's very cleverly named Player, you're then presented with how the world, or apparently just the city, went to hell. You start off working sanitation, and just like real life, nobody has any respect for the overworked, underpaid working class.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Oh, and by the way, if you actually treat real-life workers like this, you suck and I hate you.
I hate this job.
I feel you, sis. I feel ya. Everyone is way too excited about the fictional corporation Fizzco unveiling a brand new energy drink called Overcharge. Only problem is that it was apparently so poorly tested that person being mutated into horrifying monster slipped past QA. Pretty sure this rounds up to at least, like, 50 FDA violations. Everything goes downhill pretty quickly, with the entire city becoming a wasteland infested with mutants and violence, seemingly overnight. Given the entire past year, you guys have no idea how hard it is to avoid the low-hanging fruit on this. You end up as one of the handful of survivors in the city who haven't become mutants or generic post-apocalyptic raiders, or just straight up slaughtered by the hostile environment. One of whom is an old boomer named Walter who ends up saving your character's wisecracking ass from the mutants, or as the game calls them, OD, abbreviated for Overcharge drinkers, and he brings you into his group comprised of Floyd, a former Fizzco scientist who's also an amp vendor, more on amps later, and Two Hat Jack, a weapons vendor who feels like he was ripped straight out of Borderlands, though with a lot less of the dated, lol epic meme bro humor from that series. Fizzco, being the evil corrupt capitalist organization they are, has essentially locked down Sunset City with an invisible barrier to prevent anyone and anything from escaping, and sent in machines to clean up the whole mess. The whole mess being all of the mutants and any survivors who might spread the word. All to cover up what's arguably the biggest PR disaster in the history of ever. The main plot of this game is, Player, that's what I'll be calling them from now on, I do what I want, going through many trials and tribulations in an effort to escape from Sunset City and the hellscape it's become. You make some new friends, tragically lose some friends, and just brutally destroy the fourth wall. In spite of how serious the entire premise of this game sounds out of context, this is probably one of the least serious games I've ever played. There isn't a single moment I can recall where this game even attempts to take itself seriously. All the survivors you come across are so obviously out of place for a setting like this. You have have a group of spoiled preppy college students who consistently have their attention drawn to their cell phones, one of whom is a creepy and awkward nerd that would fit right into a sitcom by Dan the man with the old creepy beat-up white van, Schneider. There's also a scout troop whose leader went missing and got taken over by a power-hungry shithead, and a group of LARPers who are taking their whole fantasy way too seriously to the point where they feed their sick king literal tree bark. Oh, and a group of Latin American cheerleaders whom you'd never want to be on the bad side of. To say the least, it's a far cry from the old hairy gruff dudes that are typically the focus of post-apocalyptic stories like this. They're so detached and disinterested from the main conflict, and arguably reality itself to an absurd cartoonish degree, that you almost forget about the chaotic state of the world, and I think it's really clever in how it does it. Any quest or event that might appear to be taking itself seriously almost always has a comedic payoff to it. One storyline quest has player looking for some rich kid's family, and it's heavily hinted that they were among the casualties of the apocalypse, only for it to be revealed that the parents abandoned him and fled the country with his money, news that he reacts oddly well to. Another has you looking for the scout troop's leader who was kidnapped, where you do find him alive, but only half the man he used to be. And everyone seems more confused about him losing all of his limbs than they are relieved that their troop leader came back alive. There's also an instance where the protagonist has to both jump into a pond full of leeches and down a full bottle of medicine which literally exists only so the game can have a sequence where you trip the fuck out. Hell, the game literally ends on a depressing note with the main character dying, only for a player to snarkily break the fourth wall and come back to life. Pretty much every quest in the game has some kind of comedic undertone, and it makes for some pretty entertaining stuff. Sunset Overdrive is always finding the most ridiculous justifications it can for why you're doing what would be pretty typical missions in any other game. It fits perfectly alongside titles like No More Heroes, Saints Row 4, and Kid Icarus Uprising as a game that's fully self-aware that it's a video game. Player is constantly breaking the fourth wall and making snarky comments about the game's own design, such as the rule of threes and the voice and text prompts that pop up, as well as the absurdity of the quests you have to do. The protagonist is essentially a toned-down Deadpool with the punk rock aesthetic, and they're absolutely merciless toward anything that remotely resembles a fourth wall. It's great and I love it. Also, the main bad guy is an evil Physco AI who sounds like SpongeBob if he was allowed to say the fuck word.
Who the fuck is accessing my memory? It's not you, asshole, is it?
Shut up, Fizzy! You're supposed to be dead, and my name isn't asshole.
Oh, really? What is it then?
I don't know. It floats above my head in multiplayer, but I can't really...
Ha! Just what I thought. Asshole!
It doesn't always stick the landing. I think a few of the winks and nods are a bit too forced, and the whole thing with the creepy nerd trying to get with this girl he really likes is really bad and not funny at all, but the way the game presents itself makes it all work out in the end. This game has a rather cheeky way in which dialogue and cutscenes play out. The best comparison I can make is that Sunset Overdrive feels a lot like what would happen if Edgar Wright was a game director. The vibe Sunset Overdrive gives off reminds me a lot of one of his films like Hot Fuzz or Scott Pilgrim or Baby Driver. Given that Edgar Wright is one of my favorite directors, with Hot Fuzz and Scott Pilgrim in particular being some of my all-time favorite movies, I'm not complaining. I recently also watched The Mitchells vs. the Machines, great movie by the way, and the editing style and 2D graphics in that film also give me a similar vibe that this game does as well, albeit with nowhere near as much raunch. Insomniac's talent with making humorous games like Ratchet & Clank carried over really nicely to Sunset Overdrive, and the humor in this game was effective way more often than not. It comes off as self-deprecating, but in a fun, jokey kind of way where it's obvious that the game is proud and confident being the way it is. It's all just so carefree and endearing. I get the dumbest fucking smile throughout the whole runtime, you just can't hate it. Sure, Sunset Overdrive doesn't have the most complex plot or characters, but it's simple and more than gets the job done. Sunset Overdrive is an open-world action-adventure game developed by Insomniac Games where, assuming you choose the male version of player, you play as the main protagonist voiced by Yuri Lowenthal. The funny thing is that this game's release predates Spider-Man 2018 by 4 years, and I doubt that this was anything other than a very big and oddly specific coincidence. Most of what you'll be doing is beating up and gunning down enemies, various means of parkour, along with completing all of the story and side quests. Sunset Overdrive has an interesting way in which it handles combat. When moving normally, you're only going about as quickly as a light jog, and in combat, this leaves you open to being ripped apart and taking large amounts of damage in the middle of a firefight. This is where the game's parkour system comes in. Throughout the game, you'll be doing a lot of rail grinding, bouncing off objects, and running on walls, and in turn, this lets you build up more speed and momentum than you'd get from normal traversal. Parkour plays a critical role in combat since the added mobility will make you less of an easy target for the frequent swarms of OD and melee enemies, and the gunfire and projectiles from all the enemies with ranged attacks. Being entirely blunt, holy shit, this game is an absolute joy to play. The momentum-based aspect of the gameplay makes even the simplest of enemy encounters so exhilarating and fun. Your character has the perfect amount of weight and responsiveness, which makes way for some absolutely insane moments. Sunset City is packed with essentially a network of rails to grind on and objects to bounce on, meaning there's always an opportunity to get the momentum you need for any encounter. When you figure out the best way to utilize your surroundings in combat, it feels super satisfying to take down all of the evil people in the world. Hell, this even makes something as mundane as traversing the overworld fun because parkour feels so intuitive and natural. There is a fast travel system, but I hardly ever used it because I was enjoying myself too much simply going from point A to point B. Between this and the web swinging in Spider-Man, I think it's safe to say Insomniac has pretty much figured out how exactly to make traversing an open world fun. Sunset City isn't super large by open world standards, but I think that works in its favor because it never takes too long to find your way around the map. Later on, you gain the ability to dash in midair and even ski across water. Games like 3D Prince of Persia, Jet Set Radio, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater have all been cited as major inspirations for the parkour in Sunset Overdrive, and yeah, this game definitely feels like if Pro Skater took place in the mutated soda drinker apocalypse. Another aspect that makes this game such a blast to play is the weapon variety you're given. You can blast enemies with a giant penis gun. This game is a masterpiece. Much like Ratchet & Clank, Sunset Overdrive gives you a massive arsenal of creative and varied weapons. From automatic rifles like the Roman Candle and the AK-F-Off, that's just rude. Powerful one-shots like the Dirty Harry and Flaming Compensator, the aforementioned penis gun, and a whole bunch of other weapons that defy conventional explanation. One of my personal favorites is the Acid Sprinkler because of how good it is with crowd control and corroding away enemy health if they don't outright die right then and there. It's a really fun selection to use, and the whole amp and style system does wonders in pushing you to be as kinetic as you can. The way this system works is that amps essentially act as equipable upgrades and power-ups that give you a new combat attribute depending on your style level. The higher your style level, which is indicated by the bar in the top right corner, the more of your equipped amps activate. You can equip amps for both your protagonist and the individual weapons you hold, which makes you way more destructive on the field. It makes for some pretty hectic chaos, and it's awesome. Throughout the game, the main class of enemy you deal with are the mutant infestation known as the OD, be it regular goons that are easy in moderation but threatening in numbers, poppers that blow up upon contact, or ideally death, and a bunch of other variations I'd rather not bloat my script describing. Along with the OD are the Scabs, your typical post-apocalyptic raider enemies, and the Physco robots during the later parts of the game. Sunset Overdrive gradually introduces you to all the new enemy types, resulting in combat only escalating in chaos and batshit insanity. Throughout the game, you collect two different types of currency, those being regular boring old cash that you use for character customization, and cans of overcharge that you trade in for new weapons and amps. I have no damn clue how an economy based around aluminum soda cans, let alone full aluminum soda cans, works, but I imagine it's probably more stable than digital cryptocurrency shitcoin garbage. Specific weapons work more effectively against one or more types of enemy than they do against others, opening the door for constant weapon switching and experimentation. It's a fair bit to take in on the surface, but when it all clicks together, the fun just doesn't stop. I even find myself just aimlessly wandering the overworld and seeking out combat encounters completely unrelated to any main or side missions, because combat is really just that enjoyable. The main story itself isn't all that long, you can breeze through it in under 10 hours playing normally, but there's more than enough extra content, be it side missions and overworld challenges, to keep you around at least a bit longer. Actual mission structure isn't anything all that out of the ordinary. If you've played any other open world sandbox games like GTA, Saints Row, Infamous, and Like basically every Ubisoft game ever made, you'll likely get the basic gist. Find some random chucklefuck with an objective marker over their head, talk to them to start a mission, and finish it to continue the story. The missions all do a phenomenal job taking advantage of Sunset Overdrive's game mechanics and tone. It's always consistently fun throughout its short runtime. I will say that the bosses are kinda lacking. They're not bad, but I just remember so little about their actual fights, which is a shame because they have some pretty creative concepts. The evil SpongeBob sounding AI who you fight as the first and final boss, and the egotistical scout leader who downs a whole can of overcharge when backed into a corner are neat ideas, but their fights are kinda just underwhelming. That aside, this game slaps pretty fucking hard and the presentation only takes things up from here. This game is so beautiful and just teeming with life and personality. Colors pop so nicely and the whole visual and auditory aesthetic of this game just screams punk rock. Sunset City looks seedy and dangerous, but in an almost playful, inviting kind of way. I feel like the game is saying, yeah, the city's a lost cause and the world is probably next, but hey, let's have some fun. Just as carefree and chaotic as the rest of this game is the soundtrack, and it meshes perfectly with the overall vibe the game's going for. I'm not exactly the most refined when it comes to critiquing actual music outside of video games, but Sunset Overdrive's soundtrack is really catchy punk rock and it makes the game equally as fun to listen to as it is to play. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I played the PC version of this game and for the most part, it ran at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second at all times. Again, if you see any frame dips in the video, that's not the game's fault, it's mine. I think OBS was having a few issues with CPU processing and I still don't know if I fixed it yet. Sorry about that. Though I have encountered a few actual technical hiccups in this game. At some points, a subtitle got stuck on the screen and it wouldn't go away until I exited out. Sometimes the audio got all fucky-wucky. And there's also this weird bug where some random save file I never created got corrupted and deleting it crashes the game. That's nothing game-breaking by any means at all, but it is hard to ignore given that it comes up literally every time I start this game up again. I don't know if these issues are exclusive to the Steam version, or if the Xbox One version has them too, or if my computer just hates me, but just beware. Outside of that, the game worked pretty well for me, and assuming your PC hardware is good enough, I'd say this is a good way to experience the game. For reference, here's the minimum system requirements I could find. If your setup is anything like this or better, I imagine you shouldn't have too much trouble running this game. Also, feel free to turn off a lot of the extra graphical options because they don't really affect all that much and I hardly noticed a difference. Keep fog turned on though, the game's color scheme looks a lot more dull with it off. I think that just about covers it. Sunset Overdrive is a total blast to play and I'd highly recommend picking it up, assuming you have an Xbox One, Series X, or a reliable PC. In a literal sea of games taking themselves as seriously as they possibly can, Sunset Overdrive was honestly quite a breath of fresh air. I think it's one of the more underappreciated gems of Insomniac's resume in the entire 8th console generation, and it's a real shame it didn't do better than it did. I imagine it'll probably at least gather a pretty strong cult following if it hasn't already, and it very much deserves it. You can pretty easily snag this game for $20 on Xbox and PC. For all it has to offer, it'll definitely give you your money's worth. It does sequel beg pretty hard in the after credit sequence, and given that it's been almost 7 years and there hasn't been much announced concerning a sequel to Sunset Overdrive, I'm not exactly expecting it to get one anytime soon. But hey, apparently Sony recently filed a trademark for the game's license, so I very well could be wrong. And I would not be mad if I was wrong. With that said and done, hope you all enjoyed the video. If so, consider hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing it with your friends, family, and all the random strangers who follow you on the internet. Take care and thank you for watching, I'm out.